What is your biggest accomplishment? I mean, just right off the top of your mind when I say that, what's the first thing that comes to mind? What's something that you're particularly proud of? What's a season that you've made it through that was difficult, or a degree that you've received, or something that you've accomplished? What's your biggest accomplishment? Let me ask you another question. What was your first biggest accomplishment? Something that was worth celebrating, that you felt like was a big achievement, but it was the first time you'd had that. Maybe it was a high school graduation. Maybe it came before that or after. What was the first big accomplishment that you had? Or let's put some other time restraints on it. What has been the biggest accomplishment, let's say, of the last decade for you? What have you been particularly proud of? What have you taken note of? What is it that you would share with a little bit of pride about to somebody else, and talk about why that journey was meaningful and important? Okay, a different set of questions. What was the accomplishment that you most celebrated? What milestone did you throw the biggest party for, or did somebody else or a group of people throw the biggest party for you? Did you have the party thrown for you? What step was most memorialized? What reality did you most take the time to sort of revel in? And about all of these accomplishments, how do you remember them now? How often do you think about them? How do you commemorate them now? Are there tangible or spiritual things that help remind you about them? What do you do to celebrate them? How do you mark the time and recall them? How do you revisit and commemorate them? Friends, in summer, we are often invited into celebration. Summer is a season that invites us to experience that joy and that reveling in a lot of different ways. So throughout July and August, we've been looking at the seasons that summer invites us to. And so the last 3 weeks, we looked at rest and how summer as a season invites us into rest that allows us to find recovery and restoration, and even practice for seasons that are to come when we might be more busy. So now we move here in this first week of August, we move to talking about celebrations. Summer invites us to look back, to celebrate what we've come through, and to throw really great parties. And that's true, by the way, of any liminal space. Anytime you're sort of walking between two things, we're invited to look back, to reflect on the season that we've emerged out of most recently, but also to think longer term. Anytime we begin to think back, we often begin to think way back. So perhaps as a child finishes one grade, we think about ourselves finishing that grade. Or perhaps as we move to a new house, or a new job, or a new whatever it may be, we're invited to think of all the times that we've done that. These liminal spaces, they invite us to look back. And I think we're invited to mine those experiences and find some good and holy things out of it. Summer invites us into these celebrations. So let me give you some examples. First of all, summer kicked off for me with lots of celebration. In our family, we had a backlog of graduation. So Hope and I both had siblings who were graduating. We have cousins and family friends who were graduating, neighbors and people at the church. Some were actually graduating this spring, but others had graduated before, hadn't had the opportunity to celebrate just yet. And so we got together with family. We got to hear the music, and we got to see them walk across the stage. We spent time with friends. We celebrated this big step in their journey, and what a weird journey it has been for sure. And you know how we did that? We did that by gathering. But we also had those very normal reminders of it, the cap and the gown and the pomp and the circumstance, those sorts of things that they were there to help remind us of the occasion. And every time I see somebody in that get-up, that graduation get-up, I think about my own graduations. Summer brings celebrations with it. So just last weekend, I had the chance to officiate a small backyard wedding with just a handful of people. It was held at one of the couple's sisters' houses, and it was blazingly hot, and it was also just absolutely perfect and wonderful. And there was joy and laughter and wine and good food and dancing, and it was just a great evening. And I told Hope when we left that it sort of felt like we had been in a movie. They had decorated the backyard beautifully. We had sat inside their house all at folding tables in one long table to share toast together and to laugh. And I didn't know most of the people there, but we had great conversation with everybody. It's the kind of thing that I feel like happens when the credits are playing at the movie that tells you that it's time for celebration and it's summertime. And there was lots of things to remind us about love and about wedding and about the covenant and what that was all about while we were there. There was rings and dresses and flowers and toasts and all of that kind of stuff. So friends, what are you celebrating this summer? Do you have a family member moving from one grade to another, or one school to another, or one season of education to another, or perhaps to their first job? Has it been a wedding or an anniversary? Is it the 4th of July or the Olympics or a summer festival? Or is it reunions? Maybe it's the formal kind of reunions, like the family reunions or the class reunions. Or maybe it's the informal kind that so many people have been having this year as we've been able to gather again with friends, with neighbors, with fellow churchgoers, to have a sort of reunion as we've emerged out of this long, difficult season that we've been through. Whatever it was, what are you celebrating? And what is it that you carried with you into it? And what is it that you carried with you out of it? What are those things? In other words, not only what have you celebrated, but how have you celebrated? And what do you have to remember those experiences by? Or what is it that reminded you to celebrate in the first place? Maybe a class reunion itself is a remembrance of where you've been. Maybe it involves a pilgrimage back to a hometown, or maybe just being in that place and seeing those people reminds you of how far you've come and where it is that you come from. Perhaps there was mementos or souvenirs that you carried in or out of some experience, some celebration this summer. It could be that there are reminders on your calendar, reminders all around your home about things that we celebrate, things that are worth taking note of. What is this summer for you? What are you celebrating? How do you recall the big, life-changing moments in your journey? Friends, summer invites us to look back and to remember. This morning, I want to invite you to pull out a Bible and turn to Joshua 3. Joshua comes at the beginning of the Bible, pretty close to the beginning. It's the 6th book in the Bible, so it comes after the Pentateuch or the Torah, the first 5 books. And those books are really bound together, both in how we think about them in authorship, as well as the story they tell, from creation to God setting the people, the Israelites, free, naming and claiming them and setting them free out of Egypt. So those first 5 books sort of the story does as they come out of Egypt, they cross the Red Sea, and then they're entered into this 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. And then we pick up in Joshua. That's where we pick up. And there is this real handing off of the leadership baton from Moses to Joshua. And so it's a transition point in a lot of different ways. And it begins with the story of Israel about to leave this 40 years of wandering in the wilderness to cross the Jordan River into the Promised Land. And that's where we pick up the story today. So I'm going to read beginning in verse 12 of chapter 3. So now select 12 men from the tribes of Israel, one from each tribe. When the soles of the feet of the priests who carry the ark of the Lord of all the earth, rest in the waters of the waters of the Jordan flowing from above shall be cut off. They shall stand in a single heap. And then jumping down to verse 15. So when those who were carrying the ark had come to the Jordan, and the feet of the priests bearing the ark were dipped into the edge of the waters flowing from above stood still, raising up in a single heap far off. Jumping down. Then the people crossed opposite of Jericho. While all of Israel were crossing on the dry ground, the priests who bore the ark of the covenant of the Lord God stood on dry ground in the middle of the Jordan until the entire nation finished crossing over the Jordan. I want to pause right there at the end of chapter 3. And here's what I love about this story. It is so descriptive. It is so visual. You get a very clear idea. So God shows up and says, Joshua, it's time for the people to cross over the Jordan into the land that I've promised. And this is how it's going to happen. There are people who are carrying the Ark of the Covenant, which is for them the presence of God. It's big, heavy. You carry it. The priests carry it on their shoulder. And you can imagine, you can almost see this trepidation as that priest in front begins to step into the water. Like, what's going to happen. If you're watching this happen, you're just sort of waiting with bated breath. I love the imagery of this. And the water stops. And then you can sort of imagine all of the people, the whole country of Israel passing while they're standing in the middle over the damp rocks. I love the visuals of this and how much you can see it. And so what's happened is everybody has crossed over into the promised land, and then we pick up right at the beginning of chapter 4 with this. When the entire nation had finished crossing over the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, select 12 men from the people, one from each tribe, and commanded them, take 12 stones from right here in the middle of the Jordan, from the place where the priest's feet stood, and carry them with you, and lay them down in the place where you camp tonight. Then Joshua summoned the 12 men from the Israelites, whom he had appointed, one from each tribe. Joshua said to them, pass on before the ark of the Lord your God into the middle of the Jordan, and each of you take up a stone on his shoulder, one for each of the tribes of the Israelites, so that this may be a sign among you. So again, you can sort of just see them carrying these boulders from the middle of the Jordan River that's now dry, picking it up and carrying it the rest of the day to the place that they make their camp at night. And this is why this is so important, and I just love this. So that this may be a sign among you. When your children ask in the time to come, what do those stones mean to you? Then you shall tell them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off in front of the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it crossed over the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. So these stones shall be to the Israelites a memorial forever. May God add blessing to our reading and understanding of this. I love that idea. These rocks are a memorial. They're a reminder to the people forever. They get set up in this place to remember. And I love, again, that imagery. When your children ask, not only what do these stones mean, but what do these stones mean to you? This is what you will tell them. The stones are the way that they remember the thing that has happened. And when they remember, they are to celebrate. So friends, what about you? How do you remember things? How do you mark the passage of time? This idea of grabbing a stone, it isn't that strange, and maybe we don't hoist it up on our shoulder and carry it around with us like a boulder, but surely I imagine many of us have grabbed a stone or something from a place that's meaningful. Maybe it's a park that you walk through. I have several rocks that I collected from a place that I used to go camping when I was growing up. And I have small stones from different places I've been all around the world that remind me of that place. Maybe you have a piece of wood or a leaf or a shell or a coral or a bit of reef or maybe sand from a particular beach that was meaningful. I have a big stone back there that one of our kids at Common Grace gave me. It was at an event that we were doing, and every time I see it, it sits in my office. It reminds me not only of him, but of that event that we do and where we were at. And I love that reminder. Also, back behind me, it's not a rock, but it's in this sort of natural realm. There's a bottle of water from the Jordan River, the very same river that we're talking about the Israelites crossing from when I was there many, many years ago. So what do you celebrate? And how do you remember? Maybe you have birthstones or for yourself or for a child or for a parent that remind you of something about yourself or about them that you cherish because of that. I mean, we talked about weddings earlier. I say in almost every wedding that I do, when we come to the time of the rings, I say the words that have been prayed over you and spoken over you and even the vows that you've shared, all of those words with time will fade. You're not going to remember exactly what you said and exactly what they were. But even as that happens, the rings then become a reminder, a physical, visible reminder of what all of that means and why it's important. You may not remember the words, but it will remind you of the heart and the covenant that this day represents. So friends, what are the stones, real or metaphorical, that you have that remind you of where you've been? Maybe it's photos or a painting, a ring or a watch or a necklace. Maybe it's a tattoo or a scar, a hat or a t-shirt. Maybe it's a trinket or an actual stone that sits on your shelf. What are the things that you keep around or the places that you're drawn back to, maybe that you invite your children or their children to, and maybe it invites them to ask, what does this mean to you? Or maybe even more to the point, they ask, what does this mean to us? What does this say about who we are? Maybe one of the stones that you keep, you cherish because your mother or your great-grandmother or your great-grandmother's great-grandmother had a story about it, and it was meaningful, and it's been passed generation to generation. We do this, friends, in big and small ways. We have daily prayers and phrases and words and reminders. We have weekly traditions and schedules and routines and gatherings. We have annual celebrations and birthdays and pilgrimages and checkups. We have seasonal festivities at big anniversaries and graduations and changes from one thing to the next. Already in the service, actually, we've done this together. When we shared in that gift of communion, each time we do it, we say the same words, and we quote Jesus when he says, "Do this in remembrance of me." When we gather and bless and eat and drink, we're to do so in remembrance of God's mighty acts in Christ Jesus, of the liberation that we find in him. So we say, let this bread and let this juice be a reminder of Christ's birth and life and death and resurrection and God's ongoing presence with us. May you remember that and celebrate it. That's one way that we remember and celebrate what God has done and what God continues to do for us. What are the ways that you remember the big celebrations? As Common Grace is in this liminal space, we would do well, just like all of us would individually and in our families, to look back, to be reminded and to celebrate. When we get ready to move into a new and an exciting space, we do well to look on what it is that we're emerging from, where it is that we're coming out of. And so I would ask you, as you think about Common Grace, what are those things for you? What are the things that help you remember? Is it a t-shirt like Chad is wearing today that reminds you, or at least it reminds me? I've never been a part of a t-shirt church before. I've said that before. This was a first for me. But when I put that on and when I wear that, it reminds me to be intentional about the way I live and to be invitational in the way that I live. It reminds me to be thoughtful about how I interact with other people. Is it something that helps us remember why and who we are? Maybe it's a car decal, like the one that's on the little bus for the sermon series. Is it a keychain that reminds you to make grace common, like this? That reminds you that our name is not just a name, but it's a charge. It's a responsibility that, like the t-shirt, maybe it reminds us to be the hands and the feet of Christ, not in big, extraordinary ways, but in small, mundane, everyday, common kinds of ways. Is it a bag or a mug or a frisbee that's a reminder to take church to people, to create on-ramps and inroads, to be thoughtful in our welcome, to throw good parties for the sake of gathering community and meeting people where they are? Is it a photo with a camel that reminds you of a fun connection that came from an activity, from an event that we put on? Maybe it's a picture of two little boys. I have this burned in my mind, a picture of two little boys playing catch at a fall festival, knowing that just outside of the frame of the shot, one of the mothers was crying and a bit overwhelmed because life had been overwhelming for her, and her son, who struggled to connect with other people, was having a good time with another kid his age. Are there photos that help you remember things? Is it a bottle of lock de-icer that you keep in your car year-round just in case the locks on the trailer freeze again? I know it's August, but you never know. Is it a bamboo plant that reminds you of new missional partnerships, of the invitation to serve our community and partner with new people, or the conversations that we shared flipping mattresses at Cedar Lake Village? Is it stories that came from work with KVC and the joy that I got to hear and got to experience being a reindeer delivering presents to foster families? Is it homemade ornaments from the Common Grace Christmas tree, or a candle from a Christmas Eve or a community candlelight service? Is it a memory of an Easter celebration or an Easter egg hunt, a sermon series flyer or business card invite? Is it a mental reminder of babies baptized, of people saying yes to church for the first time, of birthday parties and Chiefs games? What are the stones that you carry? And how will you tell somebody else what they mean to you and why they are important? Friends, in the invitation of summer, we celebrate and look back. It's the invitation that comes with any liminal time, any time spent in the walking in between. It's an invitation to be reminded, to take stock of the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual stones that we've collected, and to celebrate how they came to be, to tell our story, to give thanks for the ones who have helped us make it this far, and to take all of that and to trust that that's going to continue and guide us in new seasons as well. So friends, one more time, what is it that you're celebrating? And what helps you remember that in this season? As we think about Common Grace and look ahead to our new season, what reminds you of where we come from? What stones mark your journey? Whether it's 50 minutes that you've been with us this morning for the first time, or you've been here since the beginning, what helps memorialize that experience for you? In this season, I want to invite you to think about those things, and we'll share those together and we'll celebrate those together. And one part of that I want to invite you to be a part of is that celebration that we're doing on August 15th. I've talked about it before, but there's information on Facebook about it, and I would love for you to come join us. We'll share in a worship service at 10:45, and then we'll share a meal, and we'll share memories, and we'll give thanks. We'll look back and be grateful and celebrate the season that we're in right now as we look forward to what is ahead. Friends, I hope each one of us has the opportunity to do that in the days, in the weeks to come, in this season that we find ourselves in, together as a community and each of us individually. Amen.